from you, and tell you what, it certainly made me ashamed that I hadn't followed through immediately with what I promised you that I would do, and I appreciated having a member who would call me on the carpet for not doing what I told him I would do. So that's the kind of member that I like to have in the league, is one that'll hold me accountable to do the things that I promised to do. I appreciate the invitation to come over here and speak. It's always a pleasure to be in front of my Georgia friends. And I want to ask you all a question. Now, this excludes, obviously, husbands and wives. But how many of you in this room knew somebody else in this room other than a family member before you joined the League of the South? Who did you know? You knew Ed. Okay. 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 Anybody else? Okay. Ben, who'd you know?
Kind of, sort of. When I first joined the league, I knew nobody, but I let my membership lapse for a good long while. My first time actually getting involved with the league, it was Mike.
Right. Okay. Well, I ask this question a lot because one of the main reasons that we wanted to start the league was to create a community of like-minded people. Now, we all don't live close enough together to see each other like we do our neighbors and the people we go to church with and the people we work with. But we do get to see each other and keep in touch with each other and work with each other toward a cause enough to form a community. Now, in the type of future that we're likely to face, short term, intermediate term, maybe long term, the idea of community, no, I take that back. Not the idea of community. Community is going to become even more important. Now, if something happens and everything falls to pieces, well, I doubt that Bob Watson and I are within shouting distance of one another, but that's kind of beside the point. Some of you in here are close to each other. And if we do our job in recruiting our friends and neighbors into this organization, you will find that you have a built-in community of people who are close to you. Not only close to you in the way they think and what they believe, but close to you physically. And they can come and help you, and you can go and help them in times of crisis and trouble. And let me tell you this, what we're staring down the barrel of right now is big trouble. You're absolutely right. I haven't seen anything in my life. I haven't been around quite as long as Glenn has, but I have been around long enough to see quite a bit. And I can remember some pretty dire times in the 70s. But nothing like what is shaping up right now. And you know, there are people driving around out there tonight in Griffin, Georgia, and Montgomery, Alabama, and Jackson, Mississippi, and all over the place. And they know that things are not really right. You know, they know that their 401k has taken a plunge, to be quite specific, a 40% plunge in the last year. That's how much the Dow Jones Industrial Average has dropped in a year's time, from early October 07 to early October 08, 40%, and 20% of that drop has been in the last month. And if you want an exciting, fun day, just turn on some financial channel on television tomorrow and watch what happens. So, we're staring down the barrel of some big trouble here. And most of your friends and neighbors, although they have some inkling that things are not quite right, they don't know the half of it. When something happens and there's no gasoline. And I understand that you folks around this area, particularly a little bit closer to the big watermelon, that's my friend Sam Dixon gave me that name years ago. He said, well, if New York can be the big apple, Atlanta can be the big watermelon. I always thought that was pretty good, to tell you the truth. But anyway, you folks around here have already experienced some gas shortages, I understand. And well, even on the way over here on Friday, I couldn't get any gas in Anniston, Alabama, which is only about an hour and a half or so west of Atlanta. So we already know that there can be gas stations with no gas. We know that there can be gas stations with unreasonably priced gas. 2 or 3 days after, what was the latest hurricane? Gustav or Ike? Yeah, get them mixed up. The station in Killen, Alabama, where I buy gas, in 24 hours raised their gas prices from $3.49 to $5.25. I didn't buy any of it, but some fools did. But when I was much younger, back in the late 70s, there was a gas shortage and a trucker strike. And I can remember my wife asked me to stop by the grocery store on the way home from school. I was teaching in Alabama at the time. And pick up some bread and milk and stuff like that, And I walked in the grocery store, and for the first time in my life, I saw grocery store shelves that were closer to being empty than full. And that image stuck in my brain. And I think maybe it was Ben who mentioned that New York City had, a 4-day supply of food? If the trucks can't run. That's 4 days at the rate of people buying things normally. What would it be if there was a panic and people went out and hoarded up on food? It probably would be a lot less than 96 hours, 4 days. There are people out here in Griffin, Georgia, as I was saying, who have no idea what they would do if this happened. They don't want to think about this happening because it's too unpleasant.
That's true.
But that doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. Now, I can't sit here and pull out the crystal ball and gaze into it and tell you the severity of this crisis, when it's going to happen. But reason, common sense will tell you that something like this coming down the road at us. It may be sooner, it may be later. The League has been asking, pleading with people who will listen to us for years, to wean yourself from the establishment. Not to depend on the establishment. And the establishment here is a very broad definition. If you depend on the establishment for your job, for your retirement, for anything, you're going to be leaning on something that itself is collapsing. Divorce yourself as much as you can from depending on any of the institutions that are controlled or regulated by the establishment. If you have a pension, you better depend on something else to retire on. If you have Social Security, forget it. If you have a government job, your job is pretty perilous. If you have a private sector job with a big corporation, it's pretty perilous. On the other hand, if you've taken steps to make yourself independent as possible, you know how to grow some of your own food. You know farmers that raise livestock, other things where you can procure some of the food you can't produce yourself. You have a good source for raising your own garden, fruit trees, vines, bushes, etc. You have a good water supply nearby. You have a means of protecting what you have. And you've psychologically prepared your family for hard times. You're going to be way, way ahead of the game. Now, we all, over the past 15 years who have been in the league, have been urging our fellow Southerners and each other to take these steps. And some of us have taken them in a big way, and some of us have taken them in smaller ways, and some of us are, just beginning to take them. It's not too late. It's not too late. You may not get to do everything you want to do, but there are some things that you still can do. We have been predicting a collapse for 15 years. And we have said, we can't pinpoint exactly when it's going to happen, but a collapse with this system and all of the imbalances in it, all of the bad decisions that have been made, was inevitable. It was just a matter of time until there was a crisis that started all of these things that were so interconnected to spinning out of control. And you have seen it begin, and it's in its early stages. Back in the spring, I think it was, Ray, correct me if I'm wrong, but we had a conference call for the board, and that's when we decided to have the theme of this year's conference as surviving the empire's collapse. And all of us, all 6 of us that were on there that night, agreed that this would be a very germane topic for the times in which we live. And we did not know, 6, 7 months ago, just how pinpoint this timing would be. I was telling somebody earlier too, I think it was Gloria, our pre-registration for the conference in Chattanooga later this month, even in these bad economic times, is much better than it was last year or the year before. And I can tell you why. People look at the title, the theme, Surviving the Empire's Collapse, and you don't have to tell them what that means. Some people, not all, but some who are, smart enough to see what's going on around them, say, gee, this might be good to go to because we've promised them some practical applications. We're not just going to get up there and rail against the system and the establishment because they've done this. There will be some of that, but that's not the main focus. We want to tell people what to do to survive. We also want to let them know who's responsible and how never to allow this thing to happen again, this sort of thing. And I think that's why, God willing, and we still have available gasoline, and there's not martial law declared between now and then, that we'll have an excellent conference in Chattanooga. And if you're not signed up to go, I would encourage you to be there because you will be able to take home something that will benefit you and your family immediately. As I mentioned, the Dow Jones average has fallen 40% in 1 year, 20% of that fall in the last month. That's a precipitous drop. Several $trillion worth of quote, wealth, end quote, which it really wasn't, it's just paper, has disappeared. We've had a 750, 800, 850, I mean, after a while you lose count. What? It doesn't matter. You know, I've seen the figure as high as 1.3 trillion when all's said and done. And that's just the first one. And it didn't work. So you've got all this financial and economic gloom and doom going around, but I want you to look at it from a different angle. Let's look at it from this angle. We shouldn't be saying this is all gloom and doom, but this is the beginning of the fall of the Yankee Empire.
Amen. Yes, sir, bro.
Now, will it be hard times for people? Yes, but we want our people to come through it because we want to come through on the other side with an idea of how to reconstruct our societies. Now, I use the term reconstruct purposefully here because we had a bad reconstruction that was put on us. But when we have to rebuild or reconstruct our own society, we better make sure we do it right.
That's right.
And you know, when we put the league together 15 years ago, I did a lot of interviews for the first couple of years, and one of the questions was from all the media, and I don't care where they were from, California, New York, England, France, wherever, wanted to know, how are you going to achieve Southern independence? And I said, well, there are several different ways that it could possibly happen. You could have a formal secession movement. You could have a meeting of the state legislature to decide that the state of Georgia was going to leave the Union. You could have a delegation of people elected from the different counties or districts in Georgia that did it. There are many ways. You could even go as far as to say that we really don't have to re-secede because we've already seceded and we're now just a conquered nation and we just have to reassert our independence. But whatever happens along those lines would have to be approved by the state legislature or by a delegation representing the citizens of the state. But I also told all these people that I interviewed with, I said there is another means, and it may be the means that is most likely to happen. And that is the system collapses and we have to rebuild something. And I have always thought, honestly in my heart, that that is what would happen. Because the system that we have today is a system that was built on a flawed foundation from the very beginning. And that very beginning even precedes Abe Lincoln. Of course, his and the Union victory in 1865 just catapulted this whole system forward. And I'm going to talk about that again in just a minute. But this goes all the way back to the first Secretary of the Treasury of the United States, a man named Alexander Hamilton.
There we go.
We have a system in which every single dollar that you see is a representation of debt. The whole system that Hamilton put forward was based on something called the monetization of debt. Every single dollar, and I'm not talking about just physical dollar bills, I'm talking about all those electrons whirring around in computers that represent, quote, money, end quote. Every single dollar in existence was created out of debt. Now, what would happen if every single person in these United States paid off all their debts? There would be no money. What a system. So, what we have from the very beginning is a flawed financial and economic system. And upon that was built a fraudulent political system whereby the fraudulent money system started paying for the fraudulent political system. And that has just grown, that symbiotic relationship between the two has grown over the years till the point today that all politicians are mouthpieces for money men. That's it.
Yes, sir.
You want to know where a politician's loyalty lies? Go find out who gives him the most money.
There we go.
And do you think it's little people like us? No. Do you think it's bankers? Yes. Why are there bailouts? Well, that's pretty simple. Because the bankers want the money.
Exactly.
Now, about the bailout thing, you knew and I knew that it wouldn't work. Why hasn't it worked? Because they don't want just one bailout, they want several. And if they can go and say, okay, well, we got X billion, hundreds of billions of dollars, and it didn't work, we got to have some more. And do you think that Congress is going to tell them no? I mean, congressmen will do like they did the first time. They will sit there and publicly they'll just rub their brows like this and say, man, this is a tough decision. And they'll take all your calls and they'll say, I'm just going to stand for the people this time. I'm standing for the people this time. Well, they'll do it for a day or two, but then when it really gets down to nut cutting time here, they're going to vote on the side of those who pay them, and it ain't you. So there'll be another bailout. You wait and see, and it'll be bigger than the first one. And it won't do any good. It'll just make things worse. And if you noticed that every time for the last week, since the bailout was a week ago today, no, a week ago from tomorrow, that every time Ben Bernanke, the Fed chairman, Hank Paulson, the Secretary of the Treasury, or George W. Bush has come on TV to give a speech during the hours of 9:30 to 4:30, I guess, when the market's open. You can see them on TV and they open their mouth to speak, and right down in the right-hand corner is the stock market numbers. And when they open their mouth to speak, the numbers start going through the floor. So Bush is coming on tomorrow at 10 o'clock to speak, and I'll be driving back to Alabama, God willing, but I'll have the radio on. Or I'll call my wife and say, turn on the television, and when he opens his mouth, tell me what happens to that number. It's going down. And that's because the people out there, all the market, people who have money and are in charge of it, from money market managers to individuals, don't trust these people anymore. Yeah, we wonder why. But we have a fraudulent system from the very beginning, a fraudulent financial system upon which has been built a fraudulent political system, despite the best efforts of men like Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, John C. Calhoun, John Taylor of Caroline, and all our Confederate heroes to keep that from happening. When we lost in 1865, it meant that the people who had put this system together and had pushed for it for the first 70-something years of this nation, of this republic's existence, had finally won out. And their way was going to predominate. Why do you think that most of the money and the power is in the corridor from Boston, Massachusetts down to Washington, and we're nothing down here but cannon fodder, taxpayers, and consumers of all their junk that they produce? Because they won, and they have the center of power up there in that corridor, which I think is the real axis of evil in the world.
Amen.
Now, Robert Louis Dabney, one of my great military and theological heroes, he was Thomas Jonathan Stonewall Jackson's chief of staff, and he was also a Presbyterian theologian. Dabney wrote much after the war to explain why it happened and the consequences of the South's defeat. And Dabney said, okay, I'm paraphrasing here, I don't have the quote in front of me, but he said to the North, the victorious North, okay, you have won the contest. We are prostrate. I didn't say prostate, I said prostrate. We are on the ground. We're down on our hands and knees. You've knocked us to the ground. You've occupied our country. But by your victory, you have assumed a very, very weighty responsibility. You control things now, you men in the North. Us in the South, we've been defeated. We have nothing, but the clothes on our backs and whatever food that we can scrounge from our burned farms and plantations. The future of these United States of America is on your shoulders, Dabney said. That's a grave responsibility that you have. What have they done with it? They've enslaved us all. If you still have any loyalty to what we in the League of the South on good days call the American Empire, and on our bad days we call the damn Yankee Empire, if you still have any loyalty to that, because you think you have to do so to be patriotic, you need a couple of history lessons.
Sure do.
These people have robbed us blind for years. They've been down here doing it. They were doing it during the war. They were doing it in Reconstruction. They have been doing it ever since. And now they're robbing not only you as a Southerner, they're robbing the whole country. And they want to rob the whole world.
That's right.
Oh, and let me tell you, the same people who have set up Goldman Sachs and all these other big banks that are too big to be allowed to fail, these are the same people who control the International Bank of Settlements, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and they use those international instruments to do to the people of the rest of the world what they use big investment banks, they use them to do to people in this country. So they are robbing the world blind. And when I say they, we ain't they. Southerners, except those who are sellouts, have not been included within the inner circles of the establishment. Oh, you'll find a sellout from time to time, like Bill Clinton, and I don't even mention George W. Bush, because I don't know if you know, but Mr. Bush's family ain't from Texas. They're from Connecticut.
That's right.
Bush is a Connecticut Yankee, and that family has been an insider family for a long time. So only self-hating and self-betraying Southerners get to play the game, and unfortunately there have been some of those. But I'm here to tell you that the thing that these people fear most of all is your withdrawal of your consent. Your withdrawal of your consent. You may not have any other weapon to fight these people with, but you can withdraw your consent from them, and you can tell them, you will only hold me down by force. The only way that you can get me to do the things that you say I must do is to put a gun to my head, and the moment I can wrest it away from you, I am gone.
That's it.
And that is exactly what they fear. Well, let's look at that word fear. You would think that a regime such as I'm talking about would fear nothing, because they have money, they have law, they have power, guns, everything. But you know what they fear losing? They fear losing legitimacy in your eyes.
That's right.
Even the worst tyranny cannot survive if it doesn't have a base of people who support it. And we Americans, because we have been duped into thinking that it's patriotic to support whoever is elected, and don't get me off on talking about election fraud, or the process by where we get to such fine candidates to vote for. I mean, somebody watched that debate the other night. I didn't watch it. I don't watch that stuff. I mean, you know, it's like pornography to me. It's something I stay away from. It sickens me. Somebody called me up and said, "Did you watch that debate?" I said, "No, I didn't watch that debate." He said, "You should have. It's like a three-ring circus. And these guys were the two clowns in it." And I said, "Well, you know, I like that analogy. But one thing I need to know is who the real ringmaster is."
Mm-hmm. Right.
These two candidates that we have today are not their own men. Do you think that anybody could ascend to such a height without some very powerful people behind them?
Of course not.
Absolutely not. Think about little puppets on strings. You got your little Obama puppet over here and your little McCain puppet over here. They're not controlling themselves. But because you are given a choice at the ballot box, and you think that all the things you were taught in 10th grade civics still applies, you know, oh, here's how our bills passed, and, you know, here's this element of government, the way it's supposed to work, and all that, you know, that's for grade school kids. You know, that's the way it is theoretically. If you really want the real picture, instead of thinking about votes and election campaigns, think about bribery, extortion, murder. That's more in tune with how politics is really played.
No doubt.
But yet, we get a tear in our eye when we say the Pledge of Allegiance and, you know, salute the flag and all that stuff like good little patriotic Americans, and we're doing nothing but empowering the crooks and criminals who have seized power over us.
That's right. They're here.
The United States government today, well, the United States government is controlled by something much more powerful than it. Did you know that companies, well, maybe a year ago, I was about to say GM, but boy, they took a hit today. GM's not worth anymore, is worth less now than it was in 1929, and that's after you adjust for inflation. GM was actually worth more in 1929 than it is today, even adjusted for inflation. Well, anyway, to make my point here, did you know that some of the biggest corporations in the world have a lot more money than sovereign countries? And in a world in which we live in, money is power. And you tell me that if a huge international conglomerate corporation, global corporation, has more money than a sovereign nation and they go head to head, who's going to win? See, we are lulled into thinking that politics is power. It's not. Money is power in today's world. And that's why politics is a poor man's substitute for big money corporatism. Want to find the real powers behind the throne? Don't look for politicians. Look for the men who make the money. So basically what we're told is we need to simply keep doing the things we're doing, salute the flag, saying the pledge, voting, treating our politicians like royalty, calling our congressmen. It's all a diversion, folks. It's all a diversion away from where the real power is and to get you to be loyal citizens to the regime that exists right now that is fleecing you and your neighbors. That is why the first step is to psychologically break with these people by withdrawing your consent. Oh yes, they've got a gun pointed at your head and you're still going to have to do some of the things they tell you to do. But you won't like it and you'll know that it's illegitimate. And you'll know that at the first moment you can break away from them, you will. And if you live your life like that, plus if you will prepare to get through the hard times that these people have brought down on everybody's heads, and I can tell you why they're bringing them down on our heads. They want to further rob us and make us no more than serfs who have to go to them on a bended knee with hand outstretched just for sustenance. If you refuse to play that game, and you can get your neighbors and friends and people you work with and worship with to quit playing this game and to get serious about getting ready for hard times, you can survive this and you can come out on the other side with a community that is no longer under bondage to these people. Because these people are not omnipotent. They're not omniscient. And they're not able to be God, even though that is their goal, is to have you worship them like you would worship God. No. They will lose control at some point, and the thing will slip away from them, and when it does, there will be chaos. Because a wounded beast like this will not go down without a fight. They will not surrender their power and their position and their wealth without a fight. But if there is a just God in heaven, and there is, He will not tolerate men such as this to thrive forever.
Amen.
Amen.
He has promised us that. In fact, He has gone as far to say is that He will take the wealth from the unjust and give it to His people, to the just. Now, that's a promise. Now, we may not be living in the age in which we see that happen, but we very well may. But the point is, this regime that we're under right now, that controls pretty much every aspect of our lives, is vulnerable, and they are afraid. I want to give you one little example that happened a few years ago, and please, those of you who have heard it before, forgive me, because I always use it because I think it's so funny, and every time I think about it, I start laughing, which is something I like to do. I like to laugh. This was about 2004, 2005 maybe. After 9/11, after the Patriot Act, after all the security state apparatus has been put in place, somehow a little private Cessna plane got loose and was flying over Washington, D.C., over the official district. The Capitol and the White House were nearby, and there was this little bitty airplane. It looked like a little toy airplane in that restricted airspace, and nobody knows how it got there. And I happened to have the television on, Fox News or CNN or something, in the office, league office there, because I sometimes keep up with the news that way. And my wife was in there, and she said, "What's going on?" They had this picture, apparently taken from a helicopter or something, above the Capitol building, and you could see these little bitty creatures. They look like ants running out of the U.S. Capitol building, like panicked ants, And then the voice came on real somberly and said, "Congress is evacuating the building." And the news media and all the talking heads made the biggest deal out of this little toy airplane flying above Washington. I said, my goodness, these people are afraid. They are so afraid. And the thing that they fear most is not little toy airplanes flying over the Capitol. The thing they fear most is being exposed for what they are. And then the people saying, "You got to be kidding. I'm not supporting these people anymore. I'm not playing their games. I'm going to take my family and we're going to learn how to live in a different way. We're going to worship the true and living God.
Amen.
We're going to create our own communities that produce the things that we need. We're going to give up all of these toys that we don't have to have. We're not going to indebt ourselves to the big corporations by buying their products. We're going to get out of debt, and we're going to live like Southern men and women are supposed to live, free and proud.
Amen.
Nobody's slaves or serfs will we be. And if it takes a fight to do it, bring it on. That is what they don't want to hear. Ray was telling me today, I'd read this but I'd forgotten about it, that there has been, I believe, a brigade, which is a, pretty good sized contingent of troops, maybe
I think it's 3,000.
3,000? Well, that's not quite as big as I thought it was. I guess maybe I was thinking about a battalion. Anyway, 3,000, that's a pretty good number of troops, but I think it's maybe from the, the 1st Infantry Division or 3rd maybe?
The 3rd Brigade of one of the divisions.
Okay, but anyway, it's a substantial number of troops have been brought home to deal with civilian unrest. Well, why would the establishment be thinking there would be any civilian unrest? Do they know something we don't know?
Exactly, yeah. There we go.
Yeah. You know, last week before this bailout was passed by, and by the way, the Senate passed it before the House. I never figured out how they could do that constitutionally, but they don't worry about such little insignificant details as the Constitution. They just do what they want to and say, what are you going to do to stop us? It's unconstitutional, sure, but what are you going to do to stop us? And we just shrug our shoulders and say, well, I guess nothing. And when you do that, they just say, well, let's see how far we can push it. You know, they're not going to throw the Constitution up. George Bush said a few years ago, he said it's just a GD piece of paper. And, John C. Calhoun said that too. But John C. Calhoun said it for the right reason. He said it is a warning to us. He said, the Constitution is a piece of paper. It's not self-enforcing. The people have to enforce it upon the government. And Bush was saying it like, well, I'm going to do what I want to. It's just a piece of paper. And that's how your rulers think. They have nothing but contempt for the fundamental law of this land if it gets in their way. And they will not stop until somebody makes them stop. And hey, when I say they won't stop until somebody makes them stop, don't you be looking over your shoulders signifying that you're saying, I wonder who that's going to be. It's going to have to be you. And if you don't help make them stop, you are not doing your duty to your God, to your fellow man, and to all of those who have died before us to give us the blessings of what that we're in the process of squandering. Now let me tell you this. I come from a long and proud line of Scots, and I'm sure a lot of you do too. Scots, Irish, Scots, etc., populated the South. And I know that I had ancestors who probably fought beside William Wallace and Robert Bruce. And then they fought to kick the British out of North America and South Carolina and North Carolina and probably Virginia. And they fought for their freedom to keep the Yankees out of here. And I look back at all those men and I think, why should I have an exemption? They fought, they bled, and they died so I could be a free and prosperous man in early 21st century America. And God bless them for having the courage to do so. Now, why, when times get bad and tyranny threatens to overtake us, why do I have an exemption from doing the same thing that they did? A man who thinks he has an exemption is a fool and a coward.
Yes, sir.
And I will tell anybody who challenges me on that to their face. I don't care how big they are or how mean they are, because it is the truth. You need to prepare yourselves to preserve your liberty and prosperity that has been won at such a great price and passed down to you as such a great blessing. And although I don't like to quote a Yankee, I'm going to quote one here, or at least try to remember what he said. He said, and it was John Adams. He said, you know, if you're not willing to stand up to tyrants, don't call us your compatriots. You know, just leave and may your chains weigh lightly on you. But get out of here and don't hinder us. And that's a good message. A great message today for us to take to our fellow Southerners as we educate them about what is going on, why it's going on, and who is responsible for it, and what the consequences of doing nothing about it will be. You can secede personally. You can withdraw your consent, and you can prepare your family and yourself for the struggle that's coming. Or you can hide your head in the sand, do nothing, make up whatever excuse you wish, and may your damn chains weigh heavily on you, because they are coming. They will bind you and suck the life out of you, and may the posterity of all those who don't stand, may their posterity curse them for the cowards that they are. I appreciate you people being where you are, because you, even if you're not yet a League of the South member, you are at least interested enough to be here on a Thursday night when you could be out doing something else. And if you've been a League member for a year, 2 years, 10 years, 14 years, thank you for doing what you've done. And rededicate yourselves to doing it even more. And we've got to bring this message to our neighbors and our friends. And we've got to let them know that it is urgent. That it's urgent. We don't have a timetable. God has the timetable. We don't. But He does give us little hints every now and then that it's time to get moving. I think He's given us one, and it's time to get moving. What are you going to do? I think you, the people in this room, will do good things. But let me tell you this. What you're about to set out to do will be difficult. Even going to your neighbors and your friends with this message that we have can bring you scorn and derision, even ostracization. You know, people may whisper behind your backs and say, well, they sure are weird, aren't they? But let me tell you this. There will come a time when they will wish they had listened to you, and if you are there, they will come to you and they will say, you were right and I am sorry. So what you're about to set out to do won't be easy, but it's necessary if we are to survive as a people. I love the South. I love this land that my ancestors settled, carved this civilization out of a wilderness that we have today. And it breaks my heart that we have sold it for a mess of pottage, but we have not sold out completely. As long as there remains 100 of us, well, you know the old Declaration of Arbroath that was issued by the Scots right before the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314 when Robert Bruce drove the English out of Scotland. He says, as long as 100 of us remain alive, we will not submit to English rule. And as long as 100 Southerners remain alive and will band with us in the League of the South, there will be an opposition to this regime and to this tyranny. And God willing, we will win, because we are faithful to Him and His Word, and He is not constrained to save by the many or by the few. He can take a small group of people and do anything He wishes with it. And the Bible is full of examples like that. So you be courageous, and you be steadfast, and you be smart, and you be diligent, and you be energetic, and you be defiant, and you withdraw your consent, and then you take that consent and you place it, replace it where it should be, with your family, your friends, your church, your local community, and you determine to get yourself and all the things you love free and out from under this monstrosity that is in the midst of collapsing, and rightfully so. But you just get out from under it. And if you can help kick the door in a little bit while it's falling down, do it. I thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight and to say these words, and I pray that Christ will be honored by all that we say and that we do. And I thank you for listening, and may God bless you, and may He save the South and our glorious civilization. Thank you.